ESL Building Global Game Ecosystems, an introduction to ESL's view of game ecosystems as pyramids from zero to hero and how we try to build this through local and global competitions, illustrated by the example of Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Learn about the core challenges and opportunities for the esports industry in building successful pyramids. The session is in English, so if you want a translation in Portuguese, access the link for the translation here on the channel. Let's welcome Brian Kramer, General Manager of ESL Gamer. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. Well, now the screen is yours. Have a great presentation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks and welcome everyone. I think you should now see the presentation if everything is correct. So super excited to be here at Big Festival. As I was introduced, I'm Brian. I'm the General Manager for Counter-Strike at ESL. Actually been around at ESL for almost 9 years now and started in the esports industry around 2007. So been around for quite some while now. And as the general manager of Counter-Strike, I'm basically responsible for, the overall strategy and everything that we do in Counter-Strike here at ESL, which includes also how we build the game ecosystem, as well as our entire product portfolio, etc. And when we really talk about esports, right? If you look at it over the past few years, it's become more than just a sport, right? It's become a cultural movement, something that's really attracting a lot of players and fans all around the world. Gamers have grown massively over the last few years, as you will also see later on in this presentation. So there is a lot of interest nowadays in the mainstream media, which I think initially there was a lot of hurdles for esports and gaming in general to really become a mainstream part in the world. And over time, we've actually achieved to get to that point that it's really accepted. You'll see more and more sports and other personalities, athletes, superstars from media industry and all other industries actually identifying themselves with gaming and esports. So we've come a long way, and to get to that point, a super crucial part for it was also building the games and the game ecosystems into a place where they can succeed and really attract wider audiences, as we see it nowadays with events like you have it here on the presentation with ESL Cologne, 15,000 people in the arena and millions of people watching online. So I really want to talk a little bit about how we at ESL view those ecosystems and how we build them to actually become attractive and more mainstream. And to do that, really just a quick introduction for why gaming is for everyone and how we see everything. So enjoy this first video here. Sorry? You don't hear the audio? What do you say?
No, we don't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually clicked everything. But... you can play from there. Yeah, that's all right. The first video. No problem. Sorry, it worked.
Gaming is open to everyone. Games teach, connect, and inspire us to challenge our limits. For the few that become true masters, a new world of competition awaits. For an ever-growing generation of gamers and digital natives, esports is their sport and their entertainment. It's digital-first, global in nature, yet intimately connected via online communities. It has transcended the online arena and fills stadiums with thousands of fans who travel from all over the world to celebrate their games, their stars, and their sport. We're at the beginning of a new, exciting era. Join us as we build a new, exciting generation of sports.
Good. Sorry for the quick technical hiccup here on my side. Thanks for playing the video. So yeah, that was the first introduction to why gaming is for everyone. So I want to talk a little bit in the first part around esports in general and where the where the gap is between gaming and esports, or how it transcends into one another. Second part is a slight introduction to ESL itself and how we see ourselves positioning ourselves against game publishers and other parts, and how we build those ecosystems. To then really talk about what those ecosystems are and how we see them. So this is a little bit of the structure going through this presentation. I think it's no secret, right? Gaming is already a super huge industry. We have around 2.7 billion gamers around the world, according to some research data from Newzoo from 2020. And those 2.7 million gamers, that is actually larger of an industry than the movie and music industry combined, if you really look at it. So esports is big. It's the world's biggest entertainment that actually exists right now. So there's a lot of interest coming. And as you can see here, it's not stopping, right? It's growing, and it's growing really fast. Over the last 5 years combined, saw an increase of around 700 million people more identifying themselves as gamers nowadays than we had it before. And that is just growing. So the opportunity in gaming is extremely huge. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, right, it's become a cultural movement, and with, new young people coming into it and growing into gaming age and beyond, right, it's just gonna grow faster and faster and larger and larger. So there's a lot of opportunity. And when we really look at how we separate gaming a little bit from esports, is, as you can see in the diagram on the right-hand side, there's we look at it mostly from a skill perspective. So similar to traditional sports, right? Imagine football. Almost anybody can play football, right? You go onto a court, take a ball, and you play a little bit. So there's really this huge player base in football, where a lot of people just play. Some are a little bit better, some are a little bit worse, but it's a huge base audience. And the higher you get in skill, obviously, the fewer players will actually be on those skill levels. So this is where the skill level will grow, sort of the player base a little bit narrower over time. So it really becomes this pyramid structure, as you can see, turn sideways here, where the top of the players are only actually a handful of players that make it to the highest stages and top tier competitions. But at the same time, if we look at what attracts the most people from an audience perspective, that is actually that small piece of the very top of the pyramid, where there are the best players in the world, high-end competitions. Those are the ones that are interesting, right? Looking at football World Cup, everybody is watching it. Even people who don't have to do a lot with football in itself will actually watch it because it's a global phenomenon and super interesting to anyone. Whereas at the same time, those local amateur competitions will have a very small audience, because it might only be friends and family watching, or people who are really into specific parts of amateur competitions that will actually watch these. And this pyramid structure is actually the one that we will see later on as a theme when looking at the game ecosystems. So keep that in mind. And just to finalize that thought and support the previous slide, right? Gaming is really accessible to everyone. It's inclusive. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. Anybody can be a gamer, whether you play on your mobile phone, your console, your PC. It really doesn't matter. Very low entry barriers and very accessible and inclusive. And esports at the same time then is really the best of the best, right? That high skill competition, as you had the reference to sports. And that high skill tier also makes sure that there's a very high interest from an audience perspective. And those people are typically very engaged with esports and generally being interested in it. So taking all of that, especially with esports in mind, and looking a little bit at ESL and how we've grown the esports industry over the past few years. right? Things started for us in the year of 2000. So actually been around for a little over 20 years now. And esports started really small. And you typically had competitions in like hotel conference room. Everybody brought their own computer. It was really a small group of people trying to compete and seeing something in this thing that they later on called esports. And over time, it has really grown into, becoming hundreds of fans, thousands of fans attending, for example, game expos like a Gamescom or similar, where we then started at some point to build the first few stages and play tournaments there, smaller studios. So it really grew over time into what is nowadays those big stadium events with thousands of people attending them, with millions of people watching online. And from there, we just see things growing further and further and starting to be able to better scale and monetize things across various game titles as well, right? If you look at the time span of 20 years, the gaming industry, that's actually a very long time. And in that time period, you saw a lot of games come and go. But ESL has been very stable and helped the industry itself grow into what it is today, no matter if certain games came or were gone at some point. We just try to grow the business overall. And luckily, Counter-Strike, as we will talk about in a bit, is one of those core games that has existed for a very long time as well and has been sort of a stable with us in growing this industry. And now we're going into the second video. If the producer could please say that.
We've come far, experienced so much, been to so many places with so many people, with one destination in mind: to create a world where everybody can be somebody. A sport where every fan has a voice. A movement where anyone can come in. People came from all over the world to be a part of it. To prove that, if you want it enough, anything's possible. There's a hero hidden in all of us, waiting to leap out of our bedrooms and onto the world stage.
So when all of us here grow older and our children grow older, we'll tell them about how it all began.
A generation came together. Friends turned into leaders. Superstars stepped out of the shadows and inspired a whole sport to do the same.
You are the people who found esports, drove esports, and believed in it.
What happens next? Well, that depends on how we write it.
Yeah, as you can see, very emotional. And the core part for us as ESL is really to create a world where everybody can be somebody, right? It's about being very inclusive, making esports accessible to everyone around the world, no matter where you are from, no matter who you are, what you do. This is really for everybody and giving everybody a path to become whoever they want to be. And one of the great examples that you can see where we've successfully created this path from somebody becoming a hero from being an quote-unquote unknown person before is the player here from the UK, which is called Smooya. He initially competed in online tournaments, etc., played his way through, and around 2018 or 2017, he actually won a local competition with his team in the UK, which was the national championship, Premiership. And through winning that, he actually got scouted by an international team who later on picked them up. The team is called Big, which is actually a German organization. And very surprisingly, in 2018, they actually managed to become finalist at ESL 1 Cologne. So one of the top tier Counter-Strike competitions. They've beaten a lot of top tier and tournament favorite teams. along the way to get there. And it has really the energy in the audience during those games. It's just incredible, as everybody was cheering for this new young guy who suddenly ruled the world in game. So you could literally hear like 15,000 people scream "Smooya, Smooya" around the entire time. So it was really magnificent, and just underlines like the story and the ambition that we have of what we want to create. And the great thing now is since November of last year, actually not just ESL creating a world where everybody can be somebody, but we have merged companies with DreamHack, which is the world leader in creating gaming festivals, together also with Big in Brazil in the past. Right? They really bring gaming and the gaming experience to life. So there's a lot of exciting things coming in the future where we can combine those great esports competitions, top tier in arena events, with DreamHack festivals that really go beyond that esports part, but really bring all different gaming aspects actually to life. So there will be a lot of exciting things coming in the future where these two parts can actually be combined at single events over a weekend, really create a festival that is also for anybody interested in gaming or esports in general. So talking a little bit of how we as ESL see ourselves within the entire industry is really at the center of building esports ecosystems. We work with a lot of different stakeholders in the industry, some of which are, for example, game publishers, right? We create tournaments for them, create entire ecosystems for them of different tiers of competitions that we'll talk about in a little bit. But at the same time, by doing that, we also create a lot of content, which we can then share with media partners. Right? Distribution across the globe is actually one of the key parts of growing esports and gaming as a whole. And we've successfully achieved that by creating a very large network of digital as well as more and more linear networks broadcasting esports competitions on their channels to really attract this younger and wider audience, as they sometimes struggle to do so with their original TV programming. And at the same time, right, one of the big other parts is really growing our brand and advertiser partnerships across the world. We've really grown a strong network of partners, both endemic as well as non-endemic to the industry. Just recently announced our extension of the Intel as well as DHL deals for the next few years. Really exciting to see that more and more brands are actually investing a lot of money and also having a true strategy behind that, or behind the entire esports ecosystem. So, we are expecting this to grow further and further as we build more successful cases of integrating these brands into what we do. And the final piece is obviously around all of the teams and players, where we've become, one of the pioneers in the esports industry to create new partnerships with the teams and the players to build new commercial structures, making sure that player standards are increased year over year, and making sure that both teams and players can successfully exist in the ecosystem and grow with us, the ecosystem as a whole. So talking about those game ecosystems and what we generally mean with them. As mentioned earlier, right, you'll see this familiar pyramid structure again, as we typically divide the game ecosystems in 3 different tiers. The first one is the open tier, which is really where everybody can compete. It's mostly happening online. You play with friends, with family. It's really not so much about the competition itself, but about having a good time, engaging with the game. You have a couple of teaser prizes, but it's really not very serious. And we really try to be very accessible on that level and make it easy for people to, tap into that esports industry and competition. And the second layer above it are then the challenger tiers, where you will see the competition turn more serious, right? Oftentimes you will see aspiring pro players or even amateur players in a more concrete way play on that level as they really grind their way through those competitions to one day actually make it to the top. And that top level is what we call the Masters tier, where those big stadium arena events are happening, large prize pools, right? In Counter-Strike, teams are playing for over $5 million in prize money every year in ESL alone. So there's actually a lot of interest and attraction coming through that top tier, which tries to attract or make the entire industry broader, because more and more players want to actually get into that and help grow the entire ecosystem pyramid. And so we generally do that not just for Counter-Strike, but also try to do that for a lot of other game titles. So what we generally do is we try to work with game publishers who may initially run a first couple of esports competitions by themselves. And as you can see here in the diagram on the left, oftentimes they start with single pieces of an entire pyramid or ecosystem. And that makes it difficult for players to really know, okay, if I now win this competition, what does that mean for me? Can I go to the next tier? Or how do I even get to the next tier? How can I play in some of those top tier competitions? So maybe one of the examples would be Fortnite, where you have the World Cup, right? Definitely one of those master level competitions. Lots of prize money, lots of attention, thousands of fans that have been in the arena there. At the same time, they don't really have a lot of structure below that. And there are competitions like FNCS happening in the game that are really accessible to everyone, which is great. But there's no clearer path from there to actually get to a World Cup one day or make the next level, become a pro player and really make a living out of that. So what we try to do at ESL is work with those game publishers and offer them different opportunities and ways to grow their ecosystem into a full pyramid and offer different levels of competitions across that pyramid. And what we've achieved now with Counter-Strike, as well as StarCraft and Warcraft very successfully, is creating or doing that by creating one true story, which is the Esl Pro Tour. That really is an overarching story tool to combine the different tiers and to make it easier for fans and players to understand where they go from where. If you win this competition, you will go there. If you win that competition, you will go there, and so on. And this also helps us to actually make it more accessible for commercial partners, because they don't have to learn 10, 15 different products that may live within this ecosystem, but it's really they own or they are partner of one product called the Esl Pro Tour, and that has several components within it. But the story is really about this overarching tool. And to give you a quick introduction, this is how our original calendar for 2021 looked like if COVID would have been resolved a little bit earlier. And as you can see, we really try to be very global and accessible to everyone with events in Europe, in Asia Pacific, in North America. We actually had a Counter-Strike major planned for Rio de Janeiro last year, which we unfortunately had to cancel due to COVID. But are hopefully looking to run that in the near future. But it's really about making the game accessible to everyone around the world, making sure that fans all around the world have something to attend and cheer for and be part of. And just as a final note here is we try to do the same on the media distribution side, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, where we have grown a very large network of partners to really make the game and the competitions accessible to everyone around the world by offering it in various local markets and local languages, both on digital platforms as well as growing the linear TV channels more and more. So yeah, this was a brief overview of how we're seeing game ecosystems here at ESL and what we're trying to achieve to create a global, accessible ecosystem for everybody around the world in esports. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you, Brian. We're a little short on time, so I will only have time to ask one question here from the Q&A. So I'll get to the first one. How can we promote the creation of esports ecosystems in emerging regions? Do you have any tips?
How to promote? Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The creation of esports ecosystems in emerging regions.
Yeah, I mean, typically the best one is really to start by creating local competitions and building a local scene. So typically we start with online competitions, seeing the level of interest in them, trying to market those, create a first few couple of local teams and player bases, and then from there grow further and further into more serious competitions like a national championship program, etc. But typically it's best to start with some online competitions, gathering some interest, building a community, helping people to find each other that play the game, and build on from there.
Okay. Oh, okay. The crew asked this to ask the next questions too. Okay. What happens when a game's popularity comes to an end? How does the team migrate to another game?
Yeah, a very good question. I mean, typically you will see interest. I mean, first point is esports typically helps to extend the life cycle of a game. So you'll see that people are more engaged with the game, which keeps the game alive for a longer time. But if we actually have to sunset a game, it's typically that the community itself just decreases and there's less and less interest in the game itself. And then at that point, we typically just end the game life cycle or our esports competitions for that with one final competition, also announcing that, you know, we're exiting the game, etc. So that is typically how we do it. But unfortunately enough, we didn't have to do that with a lot of games yet, especially not one that has the Esl Pro Tour umbrella above it, which is one of the successful stories behind building this Esl Pro Tour system and game ecosystem structure.
Okay, and now for our final question from the audience. What's ESL's relationship with content creators? Do you work with influencers?
We do work with influencers to different degrees, right? It really depends on how mature also the game is. Counter-Strike is one of those games where we have a lot of media partners all around the world, and they obviously want to make sure that they get some sort of exclusivity around the content so they can monetize it themselves. For those games, it's a little bit tougher, but especially in the early stages of a game, it's typically very important and successful to work with content creators to make sure that the game reaches a certain level of popularity and attention, and that is where we then mostly work with them. Or what can also happen is that there's typically a good amount of interest from brand partners to actually create specific activations where then influencers can become a very strong part of that, representing the brand and combining that with what is interesting to the specific game community.
Okay. Oh, we got another question here.
All good.
What strategies do you adopt to grow your audience even more?
So yeah, I think the big part is one, obviously, that media network that I've talked about, growing awareness in markets all around the world by getting on new partners in local markets who broadcast the competitions and help us even grow some of those competitions on a local scale. So sometimes those media partners also become partners to run local competitions in their specific market, which then means they not just broadcast our global competitions to the local audience, but they also help us build a local audience by running competitions there. So it's typically around these two things, building more local competitions that help grow local game communities, and then making sure that everything that we do on a global scale is broadcasted to as many people as possible in local markets and local languages.
Okay, we still have a little more time, so everybody who's watching, if you want to ask more questions, please send them away to us. We have another one here, Brian. Do you think that younger amateur players have opportunities to become professionals, especially on Counter-Strike? This is a good one.
Yes, 100%. I truly believe so, because the ecosystem is open, so everybody can make their way into the competitions and actually become a pro player by, especially structures like the Esl Pro Tour that give you a very, very clear path of what you need to do to become a pro. Okay, you need to start in, for example, our ESEA league system, which by going through the ranks like a normal sports league, you will at some point make it to the first division of that global competition. And so yeah, there are a lot of opportunities, especially nowadays, for young players to make it to the top tier and become a pro in Counter-Strike.
Among ESL championships, what do you think is the game that provides the most opportunities for a young amateur player that wants to become an esport player?
Yeah, I would say it's really tough. It's really tough in that sense to name one specific game. Counter-Strike is obviously the biggest one that we have. I think the largest opportunity actually comes in mobile gaming. This entire industry within esports is still very young and just starting to grow and mature. So I believe that there will be a ton of opportunities for players to become a pro over there. PUBG Mobile has a very good and established esports ecosystem, but there are more and more games investing also into building an esports structure. So mobile would probably be my suggestion.
All right. Do you have any more questions from the audience? If you are watching, now's the time. If you want to have any questions for Brian. Okay, now's the time. We don't have any more questions. So, well, Brian, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. It was really good info that you brought here about how ESL works with gaming ecosystems, especially gaming competitions. And for those of you that are watching right now, don't forget to share the link to this channel, tag your friends, tell them about Big Festival 2021.
Big Festival 2021, the biggest games festival in Latin America.